In this lesson, we're going to sketch the polar graph of r squared equals cosine theta. So we're going to start when theta is 0, cosine of 0 is 1, so that gives us r squared is 1. And then if r squared is 1, that means that r could be plus or minus 1. So when theta is 0, we get r is 1, corresponding to this point on the positive x-axis. So theta is 0, r is 1. And we also get this point on the negative x-axis corresponding again to theta is 0, r is negative 1. So remember that a negative flips on the other side. So now let's see what happens, for example, at pi over 6. So at pi over 6, cosine of pi over 6 is root 3 over 2. So r squared is root 3 over 2. So then r is going to be plus or minus the square root of the square root of 3 over 2. And to graph this, let's use a calculator and get a decimal approximation for that. So that's going to be about plus or minus 0.93. So at pi over 6, our r is going to be a little less than 1. So here's r is 0.93, and then if it were negative, we would flip on the other side, and again, we're at a little less than 1. Okay, now let's see what happens, say, at pi over 4. So at pi over 4, r squared is cosine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. So then r is going to be the square root of that. And again, we'll use a calculator to get an approximation. And that's going to be plus or minus 0.84. So when theta is pi over 4, so that's our halfway angle, we're going to get a little bigger than 0.8. So we are going to be, say, about here, and then of course if we were on the negative side, we'd be on the other one. So we can see that our r's are decreasing. So now let's see what happens if we go, for example, to pi over 2. Cosine pi over 2 is 0, so r would just be 0. So we're coming in to 0. So we're getting this top half of a loop coming into 0, and then over here for the negative values, we're getting the bottom half of a loop coming into 0. Okay, so now let's think about what happens in the fourth quadrant angles for theta. So r squared has to be positive, of course, so I'm going to look now at the fourth quadrant angles for theta where cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant. So, for example, let's do theta is in the fourth quadrant. Well, let's start at 3 pi over 2. 3 pi over 2, r squared is 0, so r is 0, so at our negative y-axis, we're back at the origin. Now let's do, for example, 5 pi over 3. So if we do the cosine of 5 pi over 3, we get r squared is a half, which tells us then that r is going to be root 2 over 2, or plus or minus 0.707. So at 5 pi over 3, the plus 0.7, so we're a little bit bigger than a half, so out here, and then of course minus would put you on the other side. And so we should probably be guessing we're again going to get a loop. So let's see, at theta is 11 pi over 6. So the cosine of 11 pi over 6 is your root 3 over 2. So then when we take the square root of that, we're going to get our plus or minus 0.93. So at 11 pi over 6, we're either out to almost plus 1 or flipping over for the negative out to almost minus 1. So now we're getting just the bottom half of these two loops. So the graph of r squared equals cosine theta, we're getting these two loops on either side of the origin. Now, one thing you should notice here is that we have some symmetry in this graph, and remember that cosine is an even function, so cosine of minus theta is equal to cosine of theta, and so that tells us that we should see the symmetry that we observe in this graph.